When talking about the all-time greatest dress watches, I think the JLC Reverso has got to be my favorite. Not that I've ever even seen one in person, much less held one or owned one, but it's one that I wish I did or could or would. But that's neither here nor there because this is an affordable watch channel, and that's probably not in the cards for me. And that's true of a lot of luxury watches, and so I'm always looking for affordable alternatives. But the Reverso is such a unique concept, this idea of a watch that can flip over and either display a second watch face or just the reverse of the case back to protect it as it was originally intended. It's got this interesting twist to it that no other watches have. And it's the kind of thing that's a huge challenge when it comes to creating an alternative because you have to create a case that has the ability to flip the watch upside down somehow. And not many brands want to go through the trouble or cost of doing that. But there's one micro brand that always seems to be up to this kind of a challenge, and that would be Vario. They have produced a watch that does exactly what the Reverso does in allowing you to essentially have two watch faces that you can flip back and forth between on a single watch, and they've still done it in a watch that is incredibly affordable. Take a quick look, and then we're going to jump in and do a full review. Hey guys, my name's Dave. Welcome back to my channel, Just the Watch. And this is a channel all about affordable watches. So if you are trying to build a good watch collection but don't want to spend a ridiculous amount of money, this channel's for you. As always, I'm recording this from my home in Iwate, Japan, and today we're going to be taking a look at a Singaporean micro brand in Vario with their Vario Versa. Now, I've reviewed a lot of watches from Vario, and I am always impressed at the level of attention to detail and just the creativity and the designs that Ivan puts together with his watches. But the Versa has got to be one of his most ambitious projects that I've seen. When putting this watch together, it's obvious that he drew heavy inspiration from the JLC Reverso, a truly iconic watch that has been around for many decades. But rather than simply taking inspiration from the style and doing a small rectangular dress watch, he went all the way in creating a watch that actually mimics the functionality of the Reverso in allowing you to have two separate watch faces that are independently settable, which gives you a lot of interesting options and opportunities in a watch like this. Basically, what he's done here is taken two ultra slim watches and kind of sandwiched them together back to back to create one single watch that allows you to have two watch faces. This requires a special patent-pending case design that allows for this flipping mechanism to function. And given the fact that you've got all of this extra engineering, and again, that it's basically two watches in one, he still managed to release this at a cost of around $430, which is pretty reasonable for what you're getting here. Now, Vario did give me this watch to keep, which is why you saw the paid promotions flag at the beginning of this video. However, other than the watch itself, I did not receive any additional compensation, nor did Vario have any control over the content of this review. With that out of the way, let's take a look at the Vario Versa. The Vario Versa is one of the most daring watches that I've seen in a long time. The concept of a dual-faced watch like this is usually something that is only reserved for luxury brands, but Vario has managed to produce a tasteful, elegant, dual-faced watch and release it at under $500. This dual-face mechanism, along with the rectangular shape, is going to draw obvious comparisons to the JLC Reverso, and it's clear that Vario drew a lot of inspiration from that watch, but the Vario Versa carries its own unique design language and uses a different and much simpler mechanism for flipping the watch faces over. This is essentially two watches in one. You have two independent quartz movements, each with their own battery and their own crown, so they can be set independent of one another. These are Swiss-made ultra-slim quartz movements made by Ronda. And when these two movements with their two faces are cased back to back, it allows the entire watch to maintain a thickness of only 12 millimeters, which is about the thickness of most normal watches. The mechanism for changing between the two watches is very simple, but also very satisfying to use. You simply take the watch off your wrist, press on either the top or bottom edge of the watch face, and the housing containing these two watches will rotate around a central hinge until the face that was on the bottom swivels around with a satisfying click. And this in itself is just a really fun thing to play around with. The machining is all excellently done, and it's such a cool and unique concept for a watch. Now, that does lead to the obvious question of why would you want to do something like this? What's the point of having two faces on a watch? And there's two primary reasons why this is beneficial. The first is that it allows you to use the watch as a very effective dual time watch. Because there's essentially two separate watches cased inside of this one watch, you can freely set either one of them to whatever time zone you want. In order to set each watch face, you will have to flip the housing a little bit in order to get access to each of the crowns. And while it might be a little bit more tedious than setting the time on a normal watch, it's not that difficult to do. And it does give the crowns some extra protection when they're secured in place. So for me, this is really cool because I live in Japan, but I have a lot of family back in California. So I always love to be able to have some way to keep track of what time it is back home. And while this isn't as convenient as a GMT watch because you do have to take the watch off your wrist in order to flip around and see your second time zone, it is a lot more fun. But even though it might be more inconvenient than a traditional GMT watch, it does give you one other advantage, and that is that because each face is completely independent, you can very easily address time zones that have half-hour or even 15-minute offsets, which can be very challenging to read on a traditional GMT watch. So if you commonly need to reference one of those time zones, this is a pretty useful feature. The other benefit to having two different watch faces really comes down to versatility. It really kind of is like having two different watches on your wrist at a time. Now, Vario offers a number of different combinations that you can get. The one that I have here has a kind of Art Deco silver dial on one side and a purple enamel dial on the other. Each of the two dials has its own distinct personality. The silver dial has an Art Deco layout with blued hands, which has a classic early 20th century vibe, while the purple enamel dial has a more minimalist, modern look with a vibrant shade of purple that gives off a more fun, casual air. I think the idea here is that you can go from business to casual instantly if you like, but I think this is really mostly all about the fun factor. It's just really cool to be able to switch your watch around like this on a moment's notice. Another interesting use case that I've heard suggested is sharing this watch with your wife or significant other. Not that purple is necessarily an effeminate color, but in my case, I do prefer the silver dial to the purple one. But unfortunately, my wife doesn't share my taste in watches. Still, the small proportions of the Vario Versa do make this very effective as a unisex watch, and I could see this being a very fun watch for a couple to share if you were both into the design. So that's the why of this watch, and I think that's the really fun draw of it. This watch is extremely unique. It's unlike any other watch on the market, particularly in this price range, and the sheer novelty of it is the biggest selling factor in my opinion. But even if you take that away and examine this just as a watch from a design standpoint and a finishing and quality standpoint, there's still a lot to like. For a watch to be able to mechanically flip around like this, you might expect it to have a weird-looking case, but the simplicity of the mechanism and the elegance of the case that it's housed in almost completely disguises the fact that this is anything other than a traditional watch. Viewing the watch from its side, it has a stepped appearance, and as we've seen, that's due to the fact that this is a two-part case, with the outer part of the case remaining stationary on the wrist, and the inner part housing the two watch movements that can flip around. So the reason for this stepped effect is purely functional, but it actually looks kind of cool and beautiful as well. If you didn't know any better, you might think that that inner case is actually a bezel that was intentionally designed to look that way. Likewise, the finishing on all of the parts of the case is excellent. The outer case features horizontal brushing with streamlined, curved edges going along the tops, with the inner rotating part of the case also featuring a matching horizontal brushing, except for when you flip it around. When you do, you can see a dividing line in between the two faces of the watch that provides a cool accent that you get to see when activating that rotating mechanism. Vario also gives you not one, but two signed crowns on this watch. As mentioned before, the crowns are very slim and tucked into the case of the watch, but the styling fits very well with the aesthetics of it. Another thing that might be mistaken for an accent at first glance is the 4 screws on the face of the silver dialed side. A lot of watches use decorative screws around the bezel of the watch, and while I do think those 4 screws add some extra interest to that side of the watch, those are actual functional screws which you'll need to undo in order to change the batteries in the two faces of the watch. which is going to be a much more complicated process than changing the batteries on a normal watch. But I believe there are some instructional videos online if you get to the point where you need to do that. I also am a fan of the handset that they've used on this watch. Vario has employed thin leaf-shaped hands to both of the faces. However, the hands on the silver-faced side are blue, while the purple enamel side has silver hands. And one thing to note is that neither face features a second hand, which is going to help disguise the fact that this is a quartz watch. And for a dress watch like this, it is kind of traditional to omit the second hand anyway, so I think this is a good choice here. Finally, I've also got to commend Vario for the choice of strap that they've gone with here. This is a very elegant, tapered, Italian, vegetable tanned leather strap. Vario makes all of their own straps. In fact, they're known as a strap manufacturer as much as a watch manufacturer. And so the straps that they pair with their watches are just as special as the watches themselves. And with this strap, they've gone the extra mile by including a butterfly deployant clasp. This not only makes putting the watch on a lot easier and more enjoyable, it's also going to extend the life of the strap by reducing the amount of wear and tear on it. So that's a great feature to see as well. Now, with all that said, there are a few quirks to this watch that you need to be aware of. There were two things in particular that kind of bugged me, but both of these are kind of consequences of the flipping function of this watch. I'm not sure if there's really any way around it. First off, I found that the faces of the watches would get dirty very easily with my fingerprints or oils from my skin. The watch face that is upside down is going to be pressed up directly against your skin, so it's going to be prone to getting smudges from sweat and oil there. And unless you're extraordinarily careful, you're going to have to touch the crystal of the watch when you're flipping it around from one side to the other, which is going to introduce fingerprints as well. So either you're going to have to carry a polishing cloth around with you or always have your shirt tail handy to be ready to kind of clean things off after you flip it around. But I don't think there's any way around it with this particular design. If you've looked at the JLC Reverso and seen the way their mechanism works, it avoids these problems, but then again, it also costs like $10,000. The other thing that stood out to me is that while the watch is not that thick at only 12 millimeters, it still looks kind of thick. For instance, if you had like a 40 millimeter round watch that was 12 millimeters thick, you wouldn't really notice it at all because of the proportions of the watch and because of the way that you can hide that thickness with lug shapes and curves to the watch case. But this is kind of just a square block. And at only 25.5 millimeters across and 39 millimeters lug to lug, it's a small square block. And with those proportions, 12 millimeters does look pretty tall. It's something that I got used to after a little while, but initially the first couple times I was wearing it, it did appear to be a lot chunkier than it actually is. And again, this is purely a consequence of the fact that there are two watches sandwiched together into this small 12 millimeter block. But I think those two things, that apparent thickness and the smudges that you're going to get, are the main consequences or drawbacks to a novel and unique watch design like this one. But given the uniqueness of this watch, especially at this price point, I think those are minor annoyances that you can easily overlook if you are really drawn to the other aspects of this watch, particularly the design and that fun factor of being able to flip it around and have sort of two different watches housed in one. Again, these are the kinds of watches that really make me love Vario as a brand. They're always thinking outside the box and coming up with really unique, interesting pieces like this. All right, guys, that's going to wrap it up for today. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. Again, this is such a unique watch, so I think, you kind of got to be a fan of the JLC Reverso to really be interested in this, but I think there's probably a lot of people that are interested in that, and there's a lot of different options and possibilities that you can choose from. Vario is continuing to come out with different dial variants, allowing you even more customizability on this watch that already has so much built into it. But I would love to hear if this is something that you would wear, or if you have already purchased it, what your opinion of it is. Let me know down in the comments. Also, if you're interested in getting a watch themed t-shirt like this one or many other original designs, I have them available on my website at justthewatch.com. That's going to wrap it up for today. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you later. Bye.